Recent tariff hike by the Trump administration has sparked some sort of trade war among countries. Countries like China and Venezuela has actually started some kind of economic activities to, assuage some of the economic impact that this tariff hike may have on their economies. Well, quite recently, more recently rather, President Trump has halted this tariff hike, the reciprocal tariff hike, on some other countries except for China. Well, we're discussing Trump tariff and trade war updates, and our guest is Dr. Stanislaus Ukeje, an economist and a policy scholar. Thank you so much for coming back into our studio to have this conversation.
Thank you
Doctor.
very much for welcoming me.
Absolutely. Trump tariff, we've been talking about it all week, on this platform. Now, I am not an economist, as you already know, but we understand that tariff actually means some sort of tax. But what does reciprocal tariff mean? Because they kept, qualifying this particular tariff as being reciprocal. So what does that mean in plain terms for a non-economist mind?
Well, the truth of the matter is that we're all economists.
Okay.
Yeah, you may not have a badge. You may not be wearing a badge calling yourself economist, but we are all economists because we live within an economy. It's the science of everyday living. Reciprocal means additional tax. If you tax me, I tax you. In other words, if you impose taxes on goods coming from my country, I will impose tariffs on goods coming from your own country. In other words, the welfare of population in the two countries or the other countries go down. That's the implication. Because every tax is an increment in, maybe call it costs. Because if you produce at price X and a tax of maybe 2 is imposed on X, it becomes X plus 2 before it leaves. When it enters a country, that price becomes X plus 2. Of course, there may be other factors that will make the price to be greater than X plus 2. When the receiving country imposes the same tax on goods leaving its territory, the same thing happens in the other country. So the general population, their welfare goes down. Of course, it can affect businesses because the capital with which a business operates, when the costs rise, the capital may no longer be adequate. So the businesses could close or reduce their operation. And if they reduce the operation, they may shed staff. Then, other companies that are linked to them, like service providers, may also be let off.
Yes, Doctor, before we get to the consequences of this policy, do you think, President, because you said reciprocal means a response to probably tax that was placed on importation into that country, America, in this instance. Do you think President Trump is probably justified in this policy?
Well, it's a summary to talk about Trump. If Trump was the only person imposing tax or the tariff or demanding it, it will not work.
How so?
There are people in the United States who are against imports of goods that compete with domestic production.
Okay.
One of the oldest steel mills in the world is Bethlehem Steel. But
in America?
Yes. But because of the import of what is considered to be cheap steel in the US, that company is almost down and closed. Xerox were the first people to introduce photocopy. But you now go, if you go out into Enugu and go to any business center, you will not find Rangeros. You will find Minolta, all kinds of products. Korea, which is based in Texas, because Texas is a little bit in the tropics. We are the first people to make air conditioners. But if you go to the market now in Nigeria, you will not find the Korea air conditioners. Okay? So, the people who work in those businesses, people call them generally blue-collar workers. Makers of motor vehicles, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, all of them are out because competing imports from Toyota, Hyundai, Kia are coming into the United States. And of course, the consumers choose, the lower the price, the higher the quantity demanded.
So they can make their way into the market. Good. But you would think, from my non-economist mind again, that the answer to this would be to ban importation of certain goods. Just like in Nigeria, I think about 25 items are banned from being imported. Wouldn't it have been a better response for the Trump administration to just ban importation of certain items that might, work negatively against, their local, manufacturers, rather than just hike, tariff on importation?
Ban is a more crude way of doing things. There are many ways of imposing restrictions on trade. Tariff is one way. And because it can be reciprocated, you don't mind. Because in the long run, you believe that you will survive. Another way is to subsidize some production. For instance, during the Obama regime, there were some interventions in the motor vehicle industry in Detroit that enabled them to redesign their vehicles. That's why you saw Ford Escapade, all kinds of newly designed Ford that came into Nigerian market because they had abandoned the production. They had, surrendered to Kia, and all those American foreign companies. Another way is exchange rates modification. If you depreciate your exchange rates, your products will become cheaper abroad because the amount of money of your domestic money required by foreigners will become lower. However, what you will call market is created by law. It may not be by law, it may be by custom or norms. Let's take any market, let's say a cable in Achi. When it was, when we were still very rural, if you go to a cable, you will find different sections for different people. There are people
it's
who
called actually order this.
Good.
Order
They say that this is Ogu, Inyi, and the people from Inyi may come with earthenware.
Certain type of merchandise.
People from Ogu may come with cocoyam and things like that. They are not competing with Achi people. If the people from Achi will come with palm wine, whether raffia or palm, if people from, say, Ugwoba bring in palm wine, the people from Achi will contest it. Yeah, sometimes they can allege that the one from Ugwoba is adulterated. And then they will rally to say that they don't want them to bring, or before you sell, we must certify it to be correct. These are trade rules. In other words, it can be by norm or by agreement. WTO, and before WTO, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development had rules. These rules prohibit ban. So Nigeria was in contravention of WTO rules by banning some products. But because Nigeria is a small country relative to the world, people ignored it. But if a country as large as the US were to ban something, it will have multiplier effects. Secondly, in the US, because it's an open economy, ban may not quite work, because you will find that there are Toyota companies manufacturing plants in the US. There are Mercedes manufacturing plants in the US. There are Volkswagen manufacturing plants in the US. What they do is that this company enters the US economy, but they bring in parts from different parts of the world. They also bring in their managers. Their managers may earn lower than the US worker. All of these are to reduce costs. They want to penetrate the market. So if you were to ban Toyota cars, are you going to ban the one that is already inside the US? So this tariff is a way of affecting or equalizing prices, so that if you are making General Motors and the cost of road wheels, that's what we call tire here, is $200 in the US, but Toyota imports its own made by Bridgestone in Indonesia or Malaysia at $80. This tariff will bring the prices equal, so that all car manufacturers in the US will face $200 per tire.
Level playing field. Okay.
And then they can compete. If you can't compete, you leave. But the American company cannot leave. Secondly, there is a class problem. Class, yeah. Because
social class?
Yes. The US investors are not quite happy that workers in the US are protected by minimum wage laws. You know, not our type of minimum wage. They have hourly rates, which is approved by the government and is lawful. So you cannot ask somebody to work in a restaurant, wash plate for 1 hour, and you say, take meat pie and go. No. The law requires that you must pay that person maybe $15 for every 1 hour done. They even control things like tips. If you give somebody a tip, he has to report it to the management. The manager will know how much tips you collected. He may not collect it from you, but you are obliged to disclose it. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
But in other countries that US compete with, these things don't work. But the US agreement with those people require that they implement similar rules to equalize opportunity. I'll give you an example. When Trump was first president in 2018, they reached an agreement with China. It was called the US-China Trade Agreement. Because these problems had always been there. They required China, and China agreed, to import additional goods worth $200 billion from the US by December 2021. China failed to implement that rule. At the end of the period, it imported goods worth only 58% of $200 billion. You are not keeping to the rules. So, like at a Cable or Oliogu or Ekaningo or any other market, those rules, it may not be written, but people must maintain it. Yeah. So, the United States have been complaining. But the difference is that the United States is a country of immigrants. You have Chinese Americans, you have Indian Americans, you have Nigerian Americans. All these people may still be loyal to their primary ethnic country. So if they are working for General Motors and see that General Motors have designed a better carburetor, they tell their people, they inform their people. Sometimes when they go on holidays, they take, design and take it back. So in the next cycle, their country of origin will improve on the carburetor. So US is left like no man's land.
Okay, so what you're trying to say is that the Trump
administration... The implication is that when I talked about class,
yes,
many American investors move their production to China, to India, to Indonesia, to Singapore, where labor cost is low. Unfortunately, after producing there at a lower cost, they bring it back to the US because no country consumes as much as the United States. Why? The US the people of the United States are extravagant they are happy people. The average family has more than one car. In Italy, by my experience, you may find a family of four different families in the compound. They have 2 cars. And they make small Fiat cars.
Yes, yes.
But in the US, the larger the vehicle, the better. They have public transport, but they don't use it. Everybody wants to drive a car. You are going to the football field, you drive a car. You are going to the church, you drive a car. You are going to school, everybody is driving. Unlike other countries where you have people using train, the US, they have no interest in such things. In Europe, people drive to the railway station, park their vehicle, enter the train, go to their work, come back, pick their car. It's not because US is large and they didn't start with economizing. So that's why they say there's a lot of opportunity in the United States. So there are underlying problems. It's not just like Trump and his supporters woke up and say, let's just put tariff. They have been suffering losses, trade losses. And if you look at the statistics, the American trade deficit is large and rising. Large and rising. Just take something like 1.5 trillion US dollars. If you were to convert it in Naira, every Nigerian will call it.
That's how much they lose annually?
That's the trade difference. Their imports compared with their exports.
Exports. Okay, the deficits.
Yes.
Makes sense.
Is over 1 trillion US dollars
Wow.
against the whole world. And a large percentage of that deficit is with China.
I was going to get to that because in all that you have, submitted, it seems as though the Trump administration is justified, in putting forward this policy. However, there's a 90-day halt on implementation, to every other country except for China. Now, do you think is the agreement that was not met by the Chinese, side that led to the halt not getting to the Chinese government? Every other country is probably because they reached out to America, some petition to the WTO, and there's a 90-day halt on reciprocal tariff, except for China. What do you think the reasons for that?
The truth is that many countries are through using the back channel to discuss with the United States. China is frontal. China is posing that they are too much. But the US appreciate that they helped China. China was not admitted into the WTO until the US voted for it to enter. China was excluded from many international organizations. Up till, I think, 1975 or so, Taiwan was holding the China seat in the United Nations. Taiwan is a small part of what may be called Chinese. But after some time, Nixon visited China in 1971 or 72. After some time, a lot of Americans started debating, why exclude China? China was admitted. Not only that, the US entered into trade agreement with China to enable China bringing goods to the US in order to increase the welfare, because China was presented as a very poor country before. It was that trade with the US that enabled China to grow rich. One of the things that Chinese do is that they have an export-led growth strategy. Export-led growth strategy. You can compare it with the people who breed cattle in Nigeria. You can see they are using cattle as what the army will call reki. They move their cattle from place to place, but it is for trade. Typically, the people who breed cattle in Nigeria don't eat beef. What they eat is mutton, that ram. Yeah. But they drive their cattle, to every place. And the federal government supports them by removing fly that was hurting the cattle from all over the country. But I don't know what they are doing for yam farmers and chicken farmers. So if somebody makes entry easy for you, but you make entry difficult for that person. What the Chinese do is that when they export to the United States, they earn the dollars. Instead of using it to buy goods from the US back to their own country, they invest it in US Treasury. They buy US Treasury bills to earn interest. And because US is an expansive country, apart from the trade deficit between them and China, if you look at the financial accounts, much of the fiscal deficit in the US is owed to China. So, I mean, how can you live?
That explains why it's more stringent with China. America is more stringent with China.
Yes, that explains it. Because you import goods, you export goods to us, we buy it happily. You don't use that money to buy goods to your own country. You now use it to buy treasury bills, to hold reserves in our economy. And the quantum of that treasury bill is so high. You earn interest, you earn from goods, and when you are told not to modify your behavior, you say that you're able.
All right, so let's talk about the implication of this tariff hike on Africa, particularly Nigeria. We know China is an exporting country, but Nigeria isn't. What are some of the implications of this tariff? Again, using my non-economist mind, I'm laughing over it because I really don't see how it's going to adversely affect, Nigeria being a consuming country. But you are the economist. What are some of the implications of this tariff hike on the Nigerian economy?
The markets are linked. When you go to our market, you may find all these generators. They will tell you that this one is non-dinner alwe na nke a bụ nke ndị mgbowo na onye Nsukka na alụ nka, but they're all made in China. But because Nigeria is a small market, the people who make those goods for Nigerians who bring it back here are usually low-scale manufacturers. Some of them may be illegal manufacturers. Let us say Yamaha has a plant in China where it's making standard generators. An engineer with Yamaha in China may set up a cloned company where he's making Hilltop Club generator for the Nigerian market. It's like stealing the design of your employer. Now, this conflict will cause a problem. When the costs for Yamaha in China rises, that subsidiary that produces Hilltop generator will face challenges. So either they stop producing or they produce at a higher cost. The Nigerian man who clones himself as Hilltop generator may have problems. Either he goes to his bank for additional capital, or he goes to a Chinese bank trying to borrow, but those borrowings have become higher. So it will have a boomerang effect on Nigeria. And because if you look at West Africa, Nigeria is the dominant country, not dominant by population, but because of foreign exchange, dollars, and through revenue, from oil. Now, if you go to Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, all around, except for maybe Ivory Coast in the past, many of these countries, if Nigeria earns 25 billion US dollars from revenue, foreign revenue a year, the whole of West Africa combined do not earn up to 500 million. So they depend on Nigeria for consumption of foreign goods. So they come here with CFA franc, go across the border, buy some flour, carry it on their head, and cross to their border. So, like if you go to Gambia, for instance, the shopping district is not up to that shopping district at New Haven. They don't have the means of importing. They import some rice, but the rice that you find there is what we call in Jagidi here, the rice that is broken. So if they want to eat long grain rice, they come to Nigeria to buy it.
To buy. Interesting. Now we know Nigeria is more of a consumption nation, but then we have things that we do export. We export crude, we export entertainment, dance, movies, music. We of course export sports and talents. Since the tariff is reciprocal, shouldn't Nigeria place some increase and hike in their own, goods and services being exported? Doesn't it work that way?
The late M.K. Abiola, he was throwing up a lot of proverbs. He said that when you cannot fight somebody, you turn it to a play. Let's say a giant gives you a big blow. You can just say, nah, or
and laugh
so you can escape. Nigeria does not have the capacity. Because when you read that Davido or all of those artists that they make money, it's not from Nigeria, it's from the US. Because they place their
on streaming
their production
platforms.
in Netflix and those things. So if you retaliate, it's just like cutting your nose in order to spite your face. We lack the capacity.
So as an economist, what would be your advice to Nigeria? Because recently the economic team national economic team met with the president. The outcome of that meeting is not quite clear, but given your experience, what would be your advice, to Nigerian economists or the economic team, economic management team, so that this, impending economic pressure can, be, reduced to the basic minimum? What would be your advice?
You may say that Nigeria has an economic team, but you may say, who are those people? One of the best trade experts in Nigeria is Professor Ademola. He retired from the University of Ibadan. I don't think he's in that team. If you come to Nigeria, its economy, the government is the largest single consumer or spender. If we want to survive, whether there is tariff or not, government consumption has to be restructured. There is an NAMCO here. It was planned as a partnership between Nigeria and Mercedes. There is Leyland in China, in Ibadan, a partnership between Leyland of England and Nigeria. Stay in Bauchi. I think there's another one in Kano. These things are intended to internalize technical progress. Without creating a ban, without tariff, there's a Peugeot in Kaduna. The government at the time Obasanjo was in office as military leader was using Peugeot
as official
vehicle. And government will not donate any vehicle to anybody if it's not Peugeot.
Built for Nigerian roads.
It was well designed because the shock absorbers were, strengthened. The one that is made in Nigeria. If government procurement was like that, and at that time many people who could afford other cars, were buying Peugeot cars to identify with the government policy. You see, businessmen, they will buy Peugeot. So when they come, they believe that the government will appreciate them for using.
Yes.
That is how to grow an economy. If you are building roads and you have STER that is making tractors, you can say, please upgrade to payloaders, this. We will be buying from you for the next 20 years. That's how Korea became a champion. But if you go to government offices now, you will see about 40 brands of cars. Some of them don't have any mechanic that has competence in doing them. So once they break down, they pack them, buy another one. So if you have an economic team that makes sense, that is where to start. We are building roads all over the country. If one or two equipment suppliers were commissioned within Nigeria to continuously supply earth-moving equipment, that company will survive. It will have workers, it will have trade.
All right. You did mention in the beginning of this conversation that the reciprocal tariff might not work. I hope I got that correctly. What exactly did you mean by that?
Say that again.
When we started this conversation, you said that the President Donald Trump's, reciprocal tariff policy might not really work. You did mention that. What exactly did you mean by that?
No, what I said was that Trump is not the only person demanding the use of tariff. Let me give you, there's a small community in Alabama. Alabama is in the south of the United States. Alabama.
Okay.
Yeah. It borders what used to be called the Gulf of Mexico, which Trump changed to the Gulf of America.
Gulf of America, yes.
In that community, they do shrimping. There's a shrimp. We import shrimps here.
Mm-hmm.
That community have been celebrating since last week because import of shrimps from some South American countries have declined because of the tariff imposed on them. They are now able to sell within the United States. You can see what I told you about comparative pricing.
Mm-hmm.
In those South American countries, maybe people are not paid well for working in the shrimp industry. So they are dumping their shrimp in the US. Of course, the consumer will buy the one that is cheaper. But you are hurting your...
Yes.
That's...
I think this same scenario plays out across different, business, spaces in America.
Yeah, if they stay the course, and say, for instance, vehicle manufacturing returns to Detroit in numbers, American workers, they are the people who actually voted for Trump because they used to endorse the Democrats. The group called United Auto Workers Union, UAW. They neither endorsed Trump nor endorsed the Democrats. But people knew that they were interested in the Trump policy of tariff.
All right. I wish you had more time to talk about this. It has actually become so interesting, but we're already out of time. Thank you so much, Doctor, for your time and for your insights into this very important conversation.
It's my pleasure talking to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for staying with us.
Signature TV, news in your pocket.